Hello, my name is Lawrence Wilson. Welcome back to our video study through the book of Hebrews. Today we begin to look more in depth at Melchizedek in Hebrews chapter 7. If you'll remember all the way back to the middle of Hebrews chapter 5, the author of Hebrews brings up Melchizedek, saying that Jesus, of whom this whole book is about, is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. But he says, before I can give you more details about what that means, the problem is everyone is hard of hearing, and they're dull of hearing. They're not at the level of understanding and maturity that they should be. And so he spends the rest of Hebrews chapter 5 and most of chapter 6 giving warnings and encouragements of that nature that we must press on to try and learn the deeper matters of our faith. And he was not wrong about that, because you could spend a lot of time studying some of the things that we're going to see in the next few chapters, and particularly regarding this man, Melchizedek, that we see in Hebrews chapter 7. He says, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings, and blessed him. And to Abraham apportioned a tenth part of everything. He is first, by translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever." A couple of important things pointed out here about Melchizedek. We find out right off the bat, he's King of Salem, priest of the Most High God. Now, Melchizedek is first mentioned way back in Genesis chapter 14 in an event in which Abraham's nephew, Lot, gets himself caught up in a military conflict. He gets captured, and Abraham goes to rescue Lot and the rest of the people of his city that he's living in at the time, Sodom, from these people that have captured them. And at the end of the victory, the king of Sodom tells Abraham, "Look, you can keep any spoils of war that you've won if you'll return to us our people." And so Abraham he meets this guy Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, and he takes 1/10, or what we would call a tithe, of all of the spoils of the war that he's gotten, and he gives them to Melchizedek as an offering to God, because Melchizedek is serving as the priest of the Most High God, as it says here, right? And so Abraham gives him 1/10 of it. We find out that Melchizedek's name means King of Righteousness. His title, King of Salem, translates out to King of Peace. That it says he has no father or mother, no ancestry to speak of, at least in Genesis chapter 14 or anywhere else in the Bible. Doesn't really tell us where he really came from or what his lineage, his ancestry is. No beginning of days, no end of life. It doesn't describe his birth or his death. But in that way, he resembles the Son of God, right? He doesn't use the title here, Son of Man, Jesus' title as the Son of David, falling in the kingly line of David, but the Son of God, right? That Jesus literally is the Son of God. He says in that way he resembles Jesus, or he's a type of Christ, a picture of Christ who was eventually to come. So it's interesting that he says Melchizedek in Genesis 14 is a picture of Christ, when now he wants to tell us that Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And what that really means is that Jesus' priesthood, which we will talk about in more depth here as we go along, Jesus' priesthood is not like the priesthood that came through Aaron, the first high priest, or the tribe of Levi that we see Moses and his law, and the law of Moses in Exodus and Leviticus laying out for us what we call the Levitical priesthood, or the Aaronic priesthood, the priesthood of Levi or Aaron. Jesus is a priest like Melchizedek was a priest, okay? And that becomes very important in understanding the nature of Christ's priesthood. But before we jump into all that, verse 4 here, it's a little bit more about Melchizedek. He says, "See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave 1/10 of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man, speaking of Melchizedek, who does not have his descent from them, received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So he begins to speak about in more detail about this Melchizedek and the nature of his priesthood in relation to the priesthood of Levi, to the priesthood of Aaron. Because he says here, look, notice that Abraham pays tithes to Melchizedek, and that Melchizedek turns around and blesses Abraham. Now, the Levitical priests, the Aaronic priests, they took tithes from the people, but they are actually descendants of Abraham, who pays tithes to Melchizedek, and then Melchizedek blesses him. He says, beyond doubt, if someone is blessing you, then he is clearly superior to you, right? The one who's doing the blessing is the superior one. An inferior person cannot bless someone who is inferior. So he says that essentially what this shows is Abraham and all of his descendants are now put as inferior to Melchizedek. And in a way, he's saying that even though Levi was not yet born, he was in a way paying tithes through Abraham to Melchizedek. And, you know, scholars debate about what exactly that phrase means, and we could get into some of the nuances of it. I encourage you to study it out on your own. But essentially, that authority of, you know, being the priest, that Levi, who eventually became the priestly tribe, is essentially saying the real authority goes to Melchizedek, who's greater because he's the one receiving the tithes and he's the one doing the blessing. He is the one that's actually greater. Notice that in the Levitical priesthood of the Old Testament, we see that the Levites, who are, he says, in one sense, mortal men, are receiving tithes. But really, it was on behalf of the one who lives, he says. It was on behalf of God Almighty that they're receiving these tithes. That's who it ultimately was given up to. And here's the interesting thing. Melchizedek is receiving the tithes from Levi. Some people actually believe not just that Melchizedek was a picture of Jesus Christ, but that when Abraham runs into Melchizedek in Genesis 14, it is actually a pre-incarnate Christ. It is actually God the Son before his incarnation, as we see in the New Testament, right? Before he was actually physically born into this earth as a man, Jesus Christ has appeared in the form of a man to Abraham, and he is receiving those tithes. There's a lot of people that believe that's actually what's happening here. There is evidence to support that. There's evidence to support as well that Melchizedek was not actually Jesus Christ, but just a man who represents him. Different people have different opinions on that, but the point remains the same, that the author is clearly trying to establish Jesus' priesthood is an eternal priesthood, just like Melchizedek, it says here, seems to be eternal. He doesn't seem to have a beginning or an ending, but he continues on a priest forever, he says. So Jesus' priesthood is forever. It's important to understand that Jesus' priesthood is not based upon genealogy or ancestry. That's why it says here, we don't have a genealogy or ancestry for Melchizedek, whereas the priesthood of Levi and Aaron was based upon, you had to be a part of that family. You had to be a part of that ancestry in order to be a priest according to the law of Moses. Jesus' priesthood is different. You don't have to be from the tribe of Levi, which is important, because otherwise how could Christ serve as a priest? Because he actually descended from the tribe of Judah. Through both his earthly parents, Mary and Joseph, were descendants of the tribe of Judah. So how can Christ serve as a priest? Because he is a priest after a different kind. He's a priest like Melchizedek, where it's not based upon genealogy, where it's something that lasts forever. And we're going to see as we go along that ultimately speaking, Christ's priesthood is greater than the Levitical priesthood in terms of what it was able to accomplish. But even from the Old Testament, the author of Hebrews is trying to show his readers that God has been showing to us for a long time that there is a greater priesthood than the priesthood of Levi, because Abraham pays his tithes to Melchizedek, basically subjugating his entire family line, including Levi, who's not yet born, to the authority of the priesthood of Melchizedek. And so, again, if you'll remember, the theme and the idea of the entire book of Hebrews is to show that Jesus is better than what came before in the Old Testament, right? We got a group of Jewish Christians, of Hebrew Christians, who, suffering persecution, are considering whether turning back to Judaism might be a better option. And this author is convincing them absolutely not. And we're about to see some incredible things to show us how Jesus Christ, who he's mentioned several times already as our great high priest, being a priest like Melchizedek, after the order of Melchizedek, instead of the order of Levi, instead of after the order of Aaron, Jesus is a much better priest, and his priesthood actually did things that accomplished our salvation, our redemption, our reconciliation with God. Again, Melchizedek, as he said, rightly so in chapter 5, he wants to say more about, but maybe sometimes our level of understanding is not quite where it needs to be. So again, I encourage you, dig into this passage and do some research and find out some of these things for yourself, because there's a lot to unpack here. And the more we can understand about Melchizedek, the better, the more we're going to understand in these next few verses and chapters as we go along. I hope and pray that something said in this video was encouraging to you, that it ministers to your heart. And I hope and pray that you go and share it with everyone that you encounter. Thank you, and God bless.